Hello and welcome to another Daily Record live stream. I'm Paul Hutchin, the paper's political editor. We're going to be looking back on the main political events this week. Joining me are two colleagues, Chris McCall, the paper's deputy political editor, and also Peter Davidson, who is the Daily Record's live politics editor. It's been a fairly quiet week comparatively. As was the case last week, both parliaments are in recess, and so there's nothing to cover in terms of chamber business. But there have been a few flashpoints that have proven to be extremely interesting. I think that the first thing we're going to look at is the Tory leadership contest, which, as we all know, is between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. And Liz Truss certainly put the cat amongst the pigeons earlier this week through some comments about the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, saying that she was an attention seeker who was best ignored. And this set Twitter alight, as you would expect. Chris, how would you summarise the reaction to these controversial comments?
Well, I mean, this really has been a Tory leadership contest like we've never seen before. I don't think we've seen one that's been as widely broadcast. The party hustings they've been having between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. They've been getting a lot of TV news coverage, and those clips have been surfacing on Twitter and across social media like we've never seen before, really. And of course, we get all the reaction. The Liz Truss's comments this week, went down as badly with nationalists as you would imagine. Although secretly, I think some senior SNP members might be more than happy that Liz Truss has chosen to pick a fight at this moment, because when no one's saying that you have to support the SNP to support Scotland, but when you denigrate the office of the First Minister, I think you don't necessarily have to be an SNP supporter to raise an eyebrow at some of the comments that have come from Liz Truss.
Peter, my impression is that the comment about attention seeking is just normal political insults, but it was the comment about ignoring the First Minister that really rankled, not just with SNP people, you would expect that, but also with senior Tories north of the border. I think Andrew Bowie, the MP, and also Maurice Golden, the MSP, were critical of what she said. Do you think that if Liz Truss wins this contest, then those comments might come back to haunt her?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, regardless of what she thinks about Nicola Sturgeon or Mark Drakeford for that matter as well, I think she called him a low-energy Jeremy Corbyn during the debate last night, hustings. She has to work with them, and it's going to be an awkward. I mean, it'd be great to get a fly in the wall in that first meeting with the First Ministers, because it's going to be just so awkward with some of the things.
Oh, I think that we're maybe losing you, Peter. Just to pick up on the point I raised, Chris, the point about attention seeking might just be interpreted as political rough and tumble, but the comment about ignoring the First Minister might be more damaging in the long term?
I think so. I mean, we're going to hear that comment repeated again and again and again, particularly when, as everyone expects, Liz Truss becomes the next Prime Minister, because she will be expected to formally meet the devolved leaders. She'll be making trips to Cardiff, she'll be making trips to Edinburgh. And whenever that comes around, the first formal meeting between Nicola Sturgeon and Liz Truss, all anyone is going to be talking about is the comments Liz Truss has made at Tory party hustings. Because let's remember, the room she was speaking to Conservative Party members who all applauded and cheered when she made her comments, as you would expect. This is the rough and tumble of party politics. However, when she becomes Prime Minister, then the real difficult work begins, because you're not just playing to 100,000 party members anymore. You're dealing with, real life situations, and you're having to deal with devolved administrations that are both run by your political opponents, Labour in the case of Cardiff and the SNP, of course, up here in Scotland. So she has kind of made of a rod for her own back here. And, it wasn't too long ago when Boris Johnson came north, when he just become Prime Minister in the summer of 2019, and he stopped for that now notorious photo call outside Butte House and was roundly booed by maybe 200 people standing outside, which, was manna from heaven from the SNP. It really, rammed home the point they'd been making, that Boris Johnson was out of touch with Scottish voters and he didn't speak for Scotland. And that clip from outside Butte House in 2019, that still surfaces to this day. So Liz Truss will be looking to avoid that at all costs. I mean, I don't think she's going to be standing outside Butte House if she can help it, but she will have to see Nicola Sturgeon at some point. And these comments, as we say, are just going to keep coming back and back.
Now, she's described herself on numerous occasions as a child of the Union. I think she's described herself in these terms even more than she's referred to her primary school education in Paisley. But if you think of it from someone who looks at politics from a pro-UK perspective, she's insulted Mark Drakeford personally. She's insulted Nicola Sturgeon personally. Now, of course, you would expect a Tory MP to have a go at both administrations on their domestic records. But do you think that by making such personal comments, she's actually doing damage to the union that she claims to want to prosper and survive?
I mean, she's certainly not doing much to help it right now, is what I would say. I mean, longer term, what her legacy in Downing Street will be in terms of the union will be defined by how she handles the Scottish Government's request for an Indie Ref 2, which, of course, if you're watching this live stream, you won't need me to tell you about Nicola Sturgeon. She wants to have another referendum on October 19th next year. Now, there are all sorts of legal hurdles that the Scottish Government, of course, have to clear between then and now, but Liz Truss and her future government are going to have to handle this very carefully. They can't just throw away the kind of comments in the last week that they've been saying and expect them to stick, because I don't think they will. And I think the Scottish Government will already be anticipating that if that is the attitude that Liz Truss and her future government take, then they could be hoping for a boost in the polls. Will it anger floating voters in Scotland, voters that haven't made up their mind on the constitutional question? Will they maybe view the intransigence of Liz Truss and say, well, I can't be doing with that, maybe I will consider independence? Of course, this is all speculation. We don't know. But right now, I mean, we have seen other Conservatives in Scotland raising concerns about the attitude that Liz Truss has taken so far. I think moderate Tories in Scotland maybe will be thinking, I really hope she doesn't stick with this, because if she does, it's not going to harm, it's not going to help anyone that's for the union.
Now, she said other things this week, as well as dismissing the First Minister. She said last night, I think at Hustings, that the entire resources of the Scottish Government were being used for the purposes of independence. Now, let's just, even if you look at the phrase entire resources in a very narrow way, you've got thousands of civil servants working in the Scottish Government. You've got a huge estate that the Scottish Government is in charge of. And then, of course, you've got the budget, which I think is about 40 billion plus. Is it accurate in any way to say that the entire resources of the Scottish Government are being used for independence, or is it epic nonsense?
Of course, it's not accurate. I mean, it's just not a correct thing to say. I mean, Liz Truss would be correct if she said one of the Scottish Government's main priorities is achieving independence. That would be correct. But, it being a priority and putting the entire resources behind it are two very different things. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know how many civil servants are employed directly by the Scottish Government, but it will run into the thousands, and, the vast majority of them are not working on independence. They are not working on a second referendum. They're doing, they're fixing the nuts and bolts of the state, the health service, the economy. They're doing all these day-to-day things that most of us will never stop and think about. But, there are all these people in the background. They'll be working away to ensure the public services continue to run. Now, Liz Truss, again, I mean, supporters of her, some of whom have, been on Twitter today, trying to correct what they interpret as she actually said. But ultimately, she said, the Scottish Government said, the Scottish Government's taking all its resources behind the referendum. That should not be the case. Now, it is spending money. Opponents of independence would suggest that the government is spending too much money in independence. That is a political point. You can take it one way or another. The figure we have is around 20 million at this point is being spent to prepare an NDRF2. And if you're against independence, of course, you'll be saying, well, that's 20 million you could be spending elsewhere. However, 20 million is, of course, not the full budget of the Scottish Government, not anywhere near it.
I know. I mean, even if you're being generous to her and exclude the budget, just look at it in terms of the staff. And as you say, you've got civil servants processing farming payments. You've got civil servants liaising with Police Scotland and the Scottish Police Authority. You've got mandarins working closely with councils and NHS boards. The idea that they are somehow working on independence just seems to be patent nonsense. So if she had said that resources of the Scottish Government are being used for independence, that would be accurate. But to say the entire resource of the government has been used for this purpose, as I said on Twitter this morning, it's not even worth a facts check. So just moving on to the second issue that we're going to look at, the cost of living crisis. The Bank of England today announced another worrying rise in interest rates. I think it's the biggest rise in decades. Now, just to put this into perspective, Peter, because I'll bring you in, we've now got an interest rate rise. We've got inflation, which could go up to 13%. We've got energy bills, which could reach £500 a month in January. And of course, the inflation I mentioned there affects every time you go to the shops or put petrol in your car. This is another hammer blow for working families, isn't it?
Yeah, and kind of added on that, you have the 5 quarters of recession as well, which was kind of also announced today. But I mean, there's been a kind of good news in like the last couple of days with petrol prices starting to fall by margins, very small margins. But yeah, it's a really bleak outlook for forecast for the next year or so. It's going to be, families are going to be, I mean, they're already struggling, and I think a lot of people are kind of fed up with a lot of the politicians saying, "Oh yeah, we understand what you're going through," but it's the lack of ideas as well. And even if you look at just look at the Tory, what we're just speaking about the Tory context, just a lack of ideas. Liz Truss is going, "Oh, we're going to slash tax," and taking it back to like the kind of Thatcher kind of days of slashing tax. It's just, we're not in that economic arena at the moment. So it's, yeah, I mean a lot of people are just kind of fed up with just a lot of talk without actual action going on. And I mean, I'm fair to him, Sunak at least has been a bit honest in saying that taxes can't go down until get back to a bit of normality. So, but yeah, it's a really, really bleak forecast for the next year or so, definitely.
Chris, I mean, I think one of the reasons we're focusing so much on Liz Truss is that all the indications are that she's going to win the contest. And if you look at these icebergs that are nearing towards families in the form of interest rates and sky-high inflation and the horrible energy rise that is forecast, then you look at what she's actually proposing, which is reversing the sort of modest national insurance rise and getting rid of the green energy levy, which I think is maybe like a couple of £100. I mean, do you think this is even nearly going to be enough to help families cope with what is a sort of tsunami of extra costs?
I mean, the short answer is, of course, no. It's not going to be anywhere near enough to help families that are already struggling to pay bills. Now, what the Bank of England announced earlier, I mean, this was a really, really gloomy forecast for the UK economy. They're predicting that inflation could hit 13% by October. Now, the last time inflation was at that level was 1980, which was a few months, a bit after Margaret Thatcher had just taken power. That's how long ago we were talking. And in the decades since, a Conservative attack line against Labour has been that Labour is weak in the economy, and they would try and conjure up the ghosts of the 1970s and talk about the days of high inflation and claim that basically Conservatives had fixed that. Now, we're now in a scenario where that just isn't credible anymore. I mean, we're seeing a return to inflation at 40-year highs, and we've had a Conservative government in power for 13 years. So when you watch these Tory party hustings, I find it remarkable how little either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak are being pressed on what exactly they would do when they take power. Now, you've mentioned, Paul, the sort of tax-cutting elements that Truss is flagging up, but they're not really serious propositions for the state the UK economy could find itself in. Now, to be slightly more positive, that the recession that the UK is headed for won't be as severe as 2008, but it would likely be around the kind of impact of the one in 1991, which a lot of people won't remember, obviously, but was pretty serious. So unemployment rise pretty steeply, very quickly at that time. And that was an issue the Tories struggled with. Yes, they won an election the following year in 1992, but I don't think it was not anywhere near as bleak, the wider economic picture, as it is now. And I know you've said before, Paul, that no government can survive inflation at 13%, and we could be heading for an early general election. If that is the case, it's going to be a very, very difficult terrain for the Conservatives to fight on.
Peter, a final point on the cost of living crisis. Although things are forecast to get much worse, they're currently pretty bad just now. I think inflation's about 9%, and families are really feeling the squeeze on their budgets. Why is it then that Labour's polling lead is so slender?
I mean, Keir Starmer said the next election is going to be about the economy. He keeps saying that, and to try and kind of reassure people, but he's out not really giving any ideas on how he's going to improve the economy. We're getting little bits here and there, but there's no big policy ideas. This is how we're going to drive growth and kind of get the economy back up and running. And that's probably why, because people are going, well, what's the alternative to the Tories? They're not really offering us anything, any hope or anything. It's just a matter of going, yeah, we're going to try and get the economy back up and running. That's all. I mean, they're not really giving us any ideas on how they're going to do it. So that's probably why I saw a poll the other day that the gap is now shortened between the Tories and Labour. So this is a Boris Johnson effect, clearly. But yeah, I mean, Labour really needs to come out with some really big ideas to say, yeah, we are the alternative and we can really sort this. It's going to be hard for any party, to be honest. But yeah, they need to come out with some ideas that's really going to grab people and go, yeah, I can really vote for that, and that I can see a change coming.
Mm-hmm. Final issue, sticking with Labour. I was at a Scottish Labour press conference yesterday, chaired by Anas Sarwar, their leader. They've got some ideas for reforming the Scottish Parliament. And I think that the assumption behind many of these reforms is that the scrutiny of the Scottish Government by the Parliament is not good enough, that some of the structures need to be updated nearly 2 decades on from the creation of the Scottish Parliament. Just to go through some of the things that Anas Sarwar was talking about, he wants a recall law, which would allow voters to sack MSPs mid-term if they fell below acceptable standards. He wants to beef up FOI, which was legislation introduced by the Labour-Lib Dem coalition back in the day. He wants to strengthen the ministerial code, which affects Nicola Sturgeon and her cabinet secretaries and junior ministers. And there's various other bits and pieces which he thinks would work as a package. Now, Chris, what's your view on this document, which was called Stronger Holyrood? Do you think there are worthwhile ideas in here, or is it a bit pointy-headed?
Yes, I mean, there are some worthwhile ideas there, the ones that you've just repeated there. I think they all do have merit. 20 years on from the Scottish Parliament being set up, I think there are areas where it requires to be strengthened. However, there is a difference between me saying that, somebody who spends time in Holyrood and follows Scottish politics for a job, and speaking to someone who maybe doesn't follow politics all that closely. I don't think, forgive the cliche, but I don't think the average man in the street is much going to care about FOI laws, even if you patiently explain to him why they should. it's just not an issue that many people are going to get excited by, especially as we talked about. I'm not going to go over it again, but the gloomy economic outlook that we face. Crossing the T's and dotting the I's at Holyrood is not going to be an issue that excites people. However, you can be charitable and say that does not mean that Anas Sarwar should not raise these issues. It is August. The Parliament's in recess, so it's maybe not a bad time to talk about these kinds of things. And to be fair to Scottish Labour, they are offering, however limited at this stage, ideas of what they might do if they ever found themselves in power at Holyrood. And of course, that does seem like it could be some time away, given current polling. But that's not to just dismiss these ideas. But in the current climate, I don't think there's going to be much cut through to the general public in these matters.
And Peter, I think that Anas's own advisors would concede that these types of reforms are not going to be vote winners, but it doesn't mean to say that they're not right to be doing it. I mean, there is an assumption that it's always Westminster as a political institution that is in need of reform. But if you look at the way that the Scottish Parliament has operated in recent years, particularly with the Salmon inquiry and some of the issues that raised, do you think that Holyrood is maybe long overdue for reform that actually enhances scrutiny of the ministers and the cabinet secretaries?
Yeah, I mean, the recall, I quite like the recall kind of part of what he was announcing yesterday and the beefing up the committees, etc. But I'm just kind of going back to what Chris was saying. It really is just, I mean, I may so actually disagree with Chris in saying that it's the right time to do it. It's probably the wrong time because we're going through such a huge cost of living crisis. We've just had kind of what we had today and what's kind of just generally the cost of living. And it's time to come out for the Labour to say, this is more of our ideas. And I know it's recess and you can say it's a kind of a good idea, but people are going, what on earth are they speaking about? Why are they going on about FOIs? Half of the population doesn't even know what freedom of information request is, for being perfectly honest. So it's we need to see change and kind of modernise it to an extent, but there needs to be a more speak about the issues that are happening right now. I think that's something that they should maybe kind of take note of and kind of think, why are we speaking about things that it's not going to affect people? People are going, how am I going to get through the next pay packet? Rather than going, oh yeah, it'd be great if we can kind of help journalists with FOI requests,
Always a cause close to my heart.
Yes.
Finally, Chris, just on Scottish Labour more broadly, I mean, Anas has been leader for, how long is it now? 18 months, something like that. I mean, Labour had a disappointing Holyrood election, but Anas had only been in the door 5 minutes, so I don't think anyone could really blame him for that result. And then in the council elections this year, they managed to get second place back from the Tories. I mean, do you think that that there's a sort of narrative of progress there that Scottish Labour are back on the pitch?
I think there is, yeah. I think, to be fair to them, Scottish Labour is in a better place today than it was 18 months ago. However, we need to caveat that and say that 18 months ago, and it was a pretty dire state. So, there was always going to be some progress. I think, it was inevitable if they did a few sensible things, which they have done. The issue, of course, is going forward, we are likely to face a general election before we have another Holyrood election, whether that is next year or the year after. And Scottish Labour's fortunes are really at this stage tied to that of Keir Starmer and the UK party, I feel. If, and it's a very, very big if, but if Keir Starmer could find a way to Downing Street within the next year, that would be a huge shot in the arm to Scottish Labour. I mean, it might be temporarily, as we've talked about before, whoever the next Prime Minister is, obviously it could be Liz Truss, but whoever wins the next general election, they're going to have a mound of problems to deal with. So even if Labour did enter government in London, they could quickly, find themselves very unpopular indeed if they're having to make difficult decisions. But, however, if they could prove themselves to be, different to the Conservatives, offer, a different style of government and offer some practical solutions to the dire state of the economy, then that could be a good thing. Labour could suddenly find themselves in a much better position They've been in since 2010. And you would expect Scottish Labour to get some sort of benefit from that. However, you know, SNP supporters that are listening to this, they'll probably be quite dismissive of that. They'll be like, look at the polls, they're very clear. The SNP is streets ahead, and it is streets ahead. And they are right now in a position to win the next Holyrood election and again deliver the biggest chunk of MPs to Westminster. So look at it that way. I mean, maybe Scottish Labour stuck exactly where it is.
So that's great. I think that pretty much wraps it up. A few bits of housekeeping. Anyone watching this can follow the Record political team on Twitter by going on to @record_politics. We've also got a dedicated Facebook group, and also there's a Daily Record YouTube site as well, which will host this content. So thanks very much for joining us, and hope to see you again soon.